In early April of 2026, Russia's electronic banking system collapsed. For a few hours, cash became the only way to pay for anything in the country. Ukraine didn't do that. It wasn't a Western sanction. It wasn't a hacker attack. It was the Russian government itself trying to fix something else. And this wasn't an isolated case. In the last 6 months, every major decision the Kremlin has made has produced a result that no one inside expected. Some of them backfired on the battlefield. Others exploded inside Russia itself. Russia is not losing to Ukraine. It's losing to itself. To understand what's happening now, you need to go back a few months and listen to what Putin promised the world. At the beginning of 2026, Putin made it clear to everyone that this would be the decisive year. According to him, Ukraine would finally give in. The Russian advance would be irreversible. The Donbass, a region in eastern Ukraine that Russia has been trying to control for years, would finally fall. And Kyiv would have no choice but to negotiate on Moscow's terms. These were not internal statements. Putin said all this in public because he needed the world, and especially the Russian people, to believe that victory was not just a possibility. It was a certainty. He went further. He set concrete deadlines. The Ukrainian city of Kostiantynivka would have to be taken by April 25th. The entire Donbass by the end of 2026. Dates, places, names, everything is very specific. But then the numbers came in, and they tell a completely different story. The amount of territory that Russia conquers per day has dropped by 2/3 in the last 18 months. At the beginning of 2025, Russian forces were advancing between 13 and 15 square kilometers per day. Today, that number has dropped to less than 6. Throughout the entire month of March 2026, Russia lost more territory than it gained. The area it returned to Ukraine is equivalent in size to half of Manhattan Island. And on April 1st, the Russian Ministry of Defense made a triumphant announcement. It said that it had finally completed the takeover of the entire Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine. What nobody pointed out was that the part of Luhansk that Russia still didn't control represented only 0.2% of the total. That was the victory announcement. Battlefield numbers are only part of the story. What almost nobody is putting side by side are 3 decisions that the Russian government has made in recent months away from the front. 3 decisions that seemed to make sense at the time and that completely backfired, each one more absurd than the last. Let's begin with the first. Take a look. The Russian war machine runs on oil. It always has. It's oil that has funded the soldiers, the missiles, the drones. Without that revenue, the war doesn't go on. That's why when Ukraine started attacking Russian oil export ports in the Baltic Sea, hitting the Ust-Luga and Primorsk facilities 5 times in just 10 days, Moscow needed to respond. And they did. The Russian Deputy Prime Minister created an emergency measure, banning all Russian gasoline exports from April 1st until July 31st. One of the world's largest oil producers banned its own fuel exports. It wasn't Ukraine that did this. It was the Russian government itself, because the destruction of the ports threatened the fuel supply within the country. And the timing couldn't be worse for Moscow. Oil prices are at their highest levels since the pandemic, driven by the Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic maritime passage in the Middle East, through which a large part of the world's oil passes. Russia should be making a fortune right now. Instead, the attacks have managed to paralyze at least 40% of Russia's oil export capacity. The worst export cut in modern Russian history, according to Reuters calculations. The money that was supposed to finance Putin's war ended up stranded in destroyed ports on the Baltic coast with nowhere to go. But that wasn't the only self-inflicted wound. Perhaps the most unlikely episode of this entire war didn't happen on the battlefield, but inside Russia itself. In February 2026, the Russian government decided to block Telegram. More than 90 million Russians use the app every month, and about 65 million access it every day. Soldiers on the battlefield use it to coordinate operations. Government authorities use it to communicate. The government itself uses it to influence public opinion before the September elections. But the Russian security services saw Telegram as a threat, and they started making it harder to access the app to push users toward a substitute created and controlled by the Russian state itself, called Max. Max doesn't protect users' messages. It shares everything with the security services whenever they ask. And according to journalistic investigations, it's controlled by Putin's family. The response was immediate and came from the most unexpected place. Russian soldiers on the battlefield called the ban a direct threat to military communications. Pro-war bloggers, the most loyal voices of the Russian government on the internet, publicly turned against the decision. A Russian lawmaker bluntly called those responsible idiots. Then, to make matters worse, the Russian government tried to block the tools people were using to bypass the ban and keep using Telegram anyway. These tools work like a virtual tunnel that disguises the user's connection, making it look like they're browsing from another country. That's when things got out of control. According to the founder of Telegram himself, Pavel Durov, blocking these tools also took down the country's electronic payment systems. For a period, cash would have become the only way to pay in most of Russia. The country that carried out some of the most sophisticated digital attacks in history brought down its own financial system while trying to stop people from using a messaging app. Think about that for a second. On that day, the biggest obstacle to Russia's war wasn't a Ukrainian drone, it wasn't a Western sanction, it wasn't a lack of soldiers, it was a messaging app. Now stop to think about one thing. Imagine spending more than 3 years using a weapon against an enemy, and that enemy not only learns to defend against it, but also finds a way to turn that defense into a billion-dollar business. What would that say about your strategy? Keep that answer in mind, because the deepest irony of this whole war was yet to come. For more than 3 years, Russia has fired Iranian-made drones known as Shahed at Ukraine almost every night. Hundreds at a time, sometimes more than 1,000 in a single attack. The goal was simple: to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure and wear down the civilian population. But Moscow never anticipated this side effect. Ukraine had no choice but to learn how to shoot down these drones. And they learned by developing interceptor drones. In other words, drones made specifically to destroy other drones in the air, capable of shooting down a Shahed for about $2,000. For comparison, each missile from the American Patriot system used for air defense costs almost $4 million per shot. Now, Iran attacks its neighbors in the Persian Gulf with these same Shahed drones. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, all using extremely expensive missiles to shoot down cheap drones. And that math doesn't add up. So, who did they turn to? To Ukraine. Zelensky signed 10-year defense agreements with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. More than 200 Ukrainian drone warfare specialists are already operating in these countries. Saudi Aramco, the oil giant from Saudi Arabia and one of the largest companies in the world, has lined up to purchase the Ukrainian systems. The weapon that Russia used to terrorize Ukrainian civilians has unintentionally created a multi-billion-dollar export industry for the country it tried to destroy. And while all this was happening off the battlefield, the situation on the front also changed in ways that Putin clearly did not expect. Ukrainian medium-range drones now reach 3 times farther than the rockets from the American HIMARS system, one of the main pieces of equipment that the West provided to Ukraine. These drones destroy ammunition depots, command centers, and air defense systems inside the territory occupied by Russia. As these defenses are destroyed, more attacks become possible. More supply lines are cut. The Ukrainian government estimates that Russia has lost up to 45% of its missile production capacity because of direct attacks on factories within its own country. A number disputed by independent analysts, but one that reflects a real and documented campaign of industrial destruction. Among the targets is one of the largest factories for electronic components for weaponry in the city of Bryansk, and a factory that produced 30,000 tons of military explosives per year in the Samara region. On the ground, the Ukrainian advance in the south has liberated more than 400 square kilometers of territory, and it cut off the supply routes that Russia had set up to sustain the advance in the east. The Russian response was to send specialized troops to contain the situation. It didn't work. And every troop sent to the south is a troop that stopped advancing in Donetsk. Every depot destroyed is an attack that never happens. Every oil port burning in the Baltic means money that never reaches the Russian government. These are not isolated events. It's an entire system, and it's working. But there's something that clearly reveals where Putin is right now. When a strategy doesn't work, the normal thing is to change it. When a narrative is failing, most people reconsider it. Putin chose to repeat it louder. And when you stop and observe what the Kremlin has done in recent weeks, you start to see something that goes beyond strategy. Panic starts to appear. Panic isn't when a government loses a battle. Panic is when a government starts making decisions that contradict the narrative it built itself. Look at the signs. At the end of March, Russia demanded that Ukraine withdraw from the entire Donbass within 2 months. 2 months. For a region that Russia has been trying to take for years and is advancing more and more slowly. The next day, the Kremlin spokesperson went on camera and said that Zelensky should have made that decision yesterday. Not in 2 months. Yesterday. That's not confidence. It's desperation dressed as an ultimatum. Meanwhile, on Russian social networks, military bloggers, the same voices who spent years celebrating every meter gained, started turning against their own government because of the blocking of Telegram. Not because of the war, because of an app. The level of control the Kremlin is trying to exert over information has reached the point of even angering those who publicly support the war. And on the front lines, Ukrainian reports document something even more revealing. Russian soldiers, cornered by swarms of drones in combat zones, are choosing to take their own lives instead of advancing. The Ukrainian government claims that this kind of occurrence has become a daily event. It's the most human and most brutal side of what's happening to the morale of Russian forces on the ground. Stop and think about that. A confident army doesn't act like this. A confident government doesn't make impossible demands on a deadline that was yesterday. Ukraine said no. And the reason is simple. Russia has been trying to take Donbass for years. It's advancing more and more slowly, and the numbers don't add up. Inside Russia, mobilization orders keep coming. The governor of the Ryazan region signed an order requiring private companies to designate employees for military service, not volunteers. These men are being designated against their will. Companies with up to 300 employees must designate 2. The larger ones, up to 5. The signs that recruitment is becoming increasingly difficult are multiplying, and the Russian government knows it. Putin has set his deadlines. April, December. He said that Ukraine would not be able to resist. What no one expected was that the biggest obstacle to Russian victory would be Russia itself. And this pattern, well, it's not something new in history. This is how great powers collapse. Not when they are defeated from the outside, but when they start to destroy themselves from within trying to stay standing. What you're watching is not just a war, it's this process happening live. Now, I want to know your opinion. Which of these do you think was Russia's worst mistake so far? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this video helped you better understand what's going on, share it with someone who is also following this war. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is a good time to subscribe and stay tuned to what's happening in the world. See you in the next video.